Hello and welcome to Swedish Farmland. Today we are talking about welding rods, and we start off with a welding series. And the first thing we'll be talking about is a very common welding electrode. It is the 7018 welding rod. It's the backbone of construction industry, at least in Sweden. And one very common stick or rod, if you say, in Sweden, is the ESAB OK48. It can be used to weld mild steel, but there's also some other uses for it. For example, if you're having an old stove and you want to weld an old cast iron stove, you can do it with this rod. But usually you don't use this for cast iron. But if it's something like a stove or something like that, then you can do it. If you have the two pieces of metal should be welded, you think like this. Then you tack a little bit here, a little bit here, and the other thing on the other side. When you tack all the fillet, the weld that you want to have in both sides, then you can run a bead a little bit there, let it cool a little, run a little bit bead over there, and you do that step by step, and let it cool, and weld, and let it cool. And usually it works. I've been doing it a couple of times with good results. You can also use a cast iron welding rod, but I found that sometimes it do have a bit more tendency to crack in cast iron that's in stoves. I don't know why, but usually you will mild steel with this. Elga also makes welding rods. That is 7018. In their case, they call it the P48S. And when it comes to welding, it's quite good because here we see we should have DC plus. That is that your electrode holder that you have in your hand is DC plus. And there you see which positions you can use when you weld. Some rods doesn't like a couple of positions. Like, for instance, if there is some electrodes can't be welded in some positions at all. But the 7018 is an all position electrode. You can weld it in every position. And you also see this. This is this heat. That is, if they get wet, you can re-dry them at 350 to 440 degrees Celsius for 2 hours. And there you see the diameter of the rod, the length of the rod, and kilograms per box. And here we see that it's 7018. That one, and the one says that it's good for low temperatures, and the H4 is so much hydrogen there is in the rod. And the 7018, it's one of the most common rods to use. And the reason that is very common in mild steel is that it's quite reliable and quite flexible. So when you're repairing farm machinery, use this quite a lot. In some countries, it's more usual to use the 6010 or the 6013. But that we will cover in another episode. And some people also use the 7016 that we also shall take in one episode. But right now we are focusing on the 7018. The 7018 has one characteristics that is not so much fun. And that is when it gets wet. It doesn't even need to get wet. It takes up the moisture from the air around it. And when it does that, when it takes up the moisture and you weld with it, you have that hydrogen I talked about. If you get hydrogen in the weld, you have a tendency that it cracks. So keep your welding rod dry, and if you can, try to get on rod oven so they're warm and nice when you start welding with them, because it makes it so much easier to weld. And I should be honest, the 7018, it's my favorite rod. I've been using this stuff for so much things, all from welding pipes to be welding for machinery and trucks. And yeah, it's a great invention. Very great. And they come in different sizes. So this is 3.2 millimeters. And here we have 4.0 millimeters. It's a bit bigger. And depending on the size of the rods, you need more or less amps. Like for the 3.2, it is 110 to 155. So if it's thin material, we use the 110. If it's thicker and we want more penetration, we use the 155. And then we have the 4 millimeter. And there it says, here we have something interesting. You see, on the other package, it was standing DC plus. Here we have DC minus also. If you switch to minus, so you have DC minus in the rod instead of DC plus, then something happens. If you have DC plus, your weld pool fills more. If you have DC minus, it penetrates more. So, but the standard for 7018 is that you have this on DC plus. At least as far as I'm familiar with it. But you also see this one needs 140 to 200 amps to run. And when it comes to farm welding, that is interesting, because usually if you don't have a very big welding rig for your mobile welding that you do on the farm, then you sometimes can take out that much amp from, let's say, a small generator to your welding machine. And sometimes the welding machine that you want to bring with you is a bit small for those kind of amps. Let's say you have a small inverter. They can run this kind of sticks, but when you're out in the field and you're doing stuff, if you don't have so much interest in welding, then maybe you don't want to spend, let's say, 10,000 Swedish kronor on a good welder. Then you can buy a cheaper one and go with smaller sticks or smaller welding rods. Like, say, for instance, you want the 2.5 millimeters instead, then you're about between 80 to 100 amps. And the most generators and small cheap inverters, they manage that without problem. Also, when it comes to mobile welding, I have found that some small welding inverters. Sometimes when they're small and not of the best quality, then you're better off running with 7014 welding rods or 6013. But that we can cover in another episode. Well, what more can we say about the 7018? It's a very, very versatile rod. It can be used to weld a lot of things. And to be honest, I think it's the most all-round electrode welder there is, because you can use it on so many kind of steels and it holds up very good, both with temperature, pressure, and a lot of stuff. So when it comes to foam welding, it definitely has its place. And I think that when you get used to using it, I don't think you want to weld with so many other rods, because it really is very versatile. Also, what happens sometimes when you're in the field, that was what I was going to say before about the inverters. There are many small, cheap little inverters right now, and that's quite good, because you don't want a very expensive inverter, especially not when you weld in farm environment, because they get abused. Sometimes the cow stands on them, sometimes the cows shit on them. It's really one of those things that if you have been having cows, then you know how curious they are. They want to test everything, including the welder. If they can get the tongue or hoof on it, they want to see what it is. And some people argue, oh, we should never let them come so close to a welder. But when you are welding at farms, things happen. And cows are very curious. Also pigs are very curious. The only thing that separates the cow from the pig, I usually say, is that the pig, he takes the stuff for you and run away and puts it somewhere. The cow can also put it somewhere else, but they can also eat it. So you have to be careful. Now, they don't eat a welder, and they don't eat the rods. That they don't do. But welding gloves, they can eat. It has happened. And also hats. So, that was about the cows. Now over to the welding. It's a versatile rod, as I said before. But it do has some limitations. And that is the strength of the bead per square inch. Some kind of steels that you found on the farm, like for instance, some parts of the plow. Now, a lot of people doesn't weld plows anymore. And that's fully understandable, because the parts for plows right now are so cheap, so it's better to change. But if you have an old plow, if you should be welding an old plow, you should be welding parts of the shears or points or something like that, then this is too soft. Then you need to go up a scale. But that we'll cover in another episode. But for joining mild steel, it's a good option. Also, as a lot of farmers do, including I, is that we see here 110 to 155 amps. If we crank this up a little bit more, and the material is not thick, we can use it to rough cut pieces. Then we use it as a torch almost. We take it to the metal and we burn through it. It's a fast way to cut metal, and it works very good, especially on pins and that sort of stuff. If you don't have a carbon arc, then this can work if it's not too big. But a carbon arc is a carbon arc. That can never be replaced. That's also a very good tool. But it's not so common on farms because it requires a lot of amperage and a lot of compressed air. But if you can afford one, and you have the time, and you have the will to power one, get one. It's great fun to use, and you can get so much work done with it. And talking about getting much work done, when you're welding with this kind of rods, the 7018 or actually any kind of rod, then there's one thing also you need to think about, and that is time. Because when it comes to time, if you have a small rod, like this one, it's 3.2 millimeters, and you have a big one like this, that is 4 millimeters. This one puts down more material than the other one. Quite obvious. So if you can go up in size, then you can weld faster. And that is always good, because then you have time to other stuff. Like, for instance, watching YouTube. Or maybe eat something or cook something. I don't know. You do what you do with your time. And I do what I do with mine. Yes, it's a great little handy rod. Good for many things. Not so much more to say about that. In another episode, we will be covering when this kind of rod doesn't do the job. What you use then. But for your general farm welding, this is the most common and most versatile, really. So that's why it's quite common. And I hope that more people understand how good of a welding rod it really can be if you practice a little.